Yes, thank you, everybody. And Dr. Widlansky, thank you for your comments. First of all, the problem with Islam, let's say today, is political Islamism. I'm not going to make a defense of Islam. There's no need to do that. But political Islamism is the root. And one of the things I think you might have noticed about both of us while we're speaking is a struggle for words. For instance, this concern about using the word fundamentalist. I use something neo-orthodoxy. We're paralyzed in our lack of language. The reason we're paralyzed in lack of language is because of the penalties if you dare to be not what is considered politically correct, at least in the United States. That's where I can speak about. It's very important to see, and I agree with you what you say about the roots of some of the concerns in Pakistan coming from Wahhabism, but a lot of them come from this very attractive totalitarian Islamist ideology, which is rooted nearby in 1928 Muslim Brotherhood ideology, which seeks to create what is quite a fictional manifestation of Islam, but a very palatable one. A palatable one that will appeal for anybody who doesn't really want to think for themselves, maybe feels afraid of asking questions of authority, or prefers to believe in a myth of supremacism, in a myth of a historic recreation of a fictional narrative where Islam was once upon a time in a golden age and now is going to be restored, and restored chiefly through one mechanism, which is dominance by subordinating others, or at its purest manifestation through violent jihadist ideology. Those are the root beliefs of political Islamists. We're not mincing words here. Central to their beliefs is a war on secularism. That war is very active right now. And that secularism is what absolutely has to be defended. And by secularism, I mean societies like Israel, where you can have any religion, no religion, change religion, give up religion without penalty, like in the United States, like in Britain. Secularism is under threat. If you think that this is an abstract, it's very real. In Pakistan, a year ago, I went to see boys who were jihadists, who were convicted jihadists, now in a safe situation where I could meet them at a school where they were rehabilitating for their ideology. So that means that they were in a school. My colleague was running the school, improving their mental health or trying to reorder their thinking after they'd been deemed not a threat to individuals in the state. So there's no question of their guilt, no question of their involvement, which is either as informers or as low-level Taliban soldiers or as suicide bombers who had defected at the last moment. And I interviewed one of them myself in Urdu. Very chilling to hear these ideas in a language that you've usually used just to talk to your parents. And they were not spurred by September 11th. They're not spurred by Israel. They don't know about bin Laden, but they do know that they have decided anyone who is a Shia is a kafir, an infidel. Anybody who wears trousers is an infidel. For your information, this microphone is too low. For your information, the whole Pakistan military wears trousers. All Pakistani police wear trousers. So the war is on secularism. If you think that data is old, the Taliban radicalization is leaving, the United States is leaving, then we just need to look at what's happened between July and this spring, and that is the tactical murder and execution of Pakistani healthcare workers who dare to vaccinate children against polio. If you want to know a lot about that, I just published in The Lancet on that last month. The reason that they want to execute usually women, because Pakistan is a conservative society where a man can't go in and advise a mother about vaccinating children. It's got to be a woman, usually a young woman who's a nurse or can give polio vaccine, is because this vaccination is deemed to be secular innovation, some sort of American plot, CIA plot, or something un-Islamic. So actually I published with two Muslim colleagues, one in Saudi Arabia and one in Pakistan, denouncing this and asking for the use of Muslim clerics to fight this ideologically. So we are all under threat. We are under threat because of what I call political Islamism, which is very much rooted in a distorted religious belief. Because it is rooted in a distorted religious belief, I think it's distorted, the subscriber will think it's true Islam. Usual strategies with which to disengage it are inhibited because an American politician who might talk about it will be labeled a racist or an Islamophobe or a bigot, or there may be worse penalties, there may be criminal charges. So one, we have to have language. Two, we have to have awareness. So maybe many of you are shy, but I'm kind of stunned that nobody recognized Shahbaz Bhatti, nobody recognized Salman Taseer. These are global names in the war on persecution of minorities. Three, wherever we seek to fight the persecution of minorities, we're not only going to assist one group, we're going to assist many, many groups, whether they are Christian or Jewish or minority Muslims or atheists, of which there are a number in these communities. And I think that there has to be a penalty. Right now, we've barely begun this dialogue. I noticed one of the chapters in your book, Michael, the journalist, the lapdog of, I can't remember the exact phrase, but part of it is the reluctance to even discuss this in the media, and the fact that if you have these views, you are deemed an extremist commentator, and certainly only a Muslim individual can really get away with saying these views now. So one, we have to speak about it. Two, there have to be penalties. You've included force. There should be sanctions. There are no penalties for Pakistan behaving in the way it does. And I've just shown you what a legitimate democracy and how big a country that is, and how huge an influence it has on the politics of blasphemy globally. That's part of what we have to do. So I want to hear your thoughts, and Michael, we have to talk more after this.
All right, Dr. Ahmed, very interesting lecture. Now, you mentioned the Ahmadiyya, and just want to ask you a little bit more to clarify that, because the Ahmadiyya originally were very active proponents of the Pakistan idea. They were for Pakistan, and then at some point after Pakistan was established, it was determined by law that they were not Muslims anymore. And the persecution that you described came after they were, shall we say, de-Islamized. Yes. Now, can you give us the grounds, the arguments why they were de-Islamized?
There had been a movement from the beginning of Pakistan for that. So Pakistan was formed in 47. By 49, there were Muslim clerics. I think they are followers of, they are the origin of Jamaat-e-Islamiyya, and they follow these ideologies by somebody called Maududi, I think that's the name. My colleague is the political scientist, and they subscribe to vehemently Islamist views. Now, they knew that the Muslim democracy was really under scrutiny because it was the world's first democracy. India had just been formed, so all eyes were on the nascent state. So it would be very difficult to go and persecute a Christian, but it's completely acceptable to say this person is not sufficiently Islamic. So a movement to make them heretics began from almost the beginning of the origins of the country, and that's quite well documented. The sources I would go to are really the best sources I've read are U.S. congressional testimony by, and also in the Harvard Human Rights Journal, where they've been well published, this systematic delegitimization, not just by individual groups, but through changes in laws, amendments, so that this has become enshrined in laws. The reason the Amitys are contested in terms of their validity as Muslims is they follow a believer. I mean, they believe in a founder who was called Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, who claimed to be the second Messiah, but didn't bring a new book and did not bring a new faith, but was sent to Muslims to remind them that they had really deviated from the ideals. And one of the central pillars of Ahmadi belief is the eschewal of all violent jihad. So I'm well aware of violent verses in the Quran that would advocate jihad. There are several kinds of jihad, but I understand about the verses in the Quran that speak to jihad. But Ahmadis and many other Muslims understand that may have been, that's a temporal document, it's not relevant today, there's no need for that, and it certainly does not fit in with the other principles of Islam that revere Maryam, revere Moses, revere the Injil and the Torah, and as well as the Quran. It's just not consistent. But I think like any minority, the other reason Ahmadis are very persecuted is they tend to be highly educated, highly intellectually well-placed, materially, economically well-off, a small group, easy to target, and pardon me? Easy to scapegoat, yeah. They happen to be, I have learned, thriving in Israel near Haifa. Yes, and I have contacted the mission there because I'd like to go and see. how does a Muslim minority that is persecuted in everywhere else in the Muslim world, but particularly Pakistan, find a means to exist and thrive in Israel?
Okay, thank you. Rabbi, let's take a question here from the Rabbi.
Yes, to ask perhaps all of you from your experience, especially with liberal groups throughout the world, after what we heard tonight, why do they continue to speak about Israel as the apartheid state and not talk about any of these other countries, which is so horrible?
Okay, before you answer, what I want everyone to know, because I see some people are leaving, we're going to take 10 more minutes of questions, and then we have a small number of books, of Kanta's books, even a smaller number of Michael's books. They're available
You have to call Amazon.
that we will sell here, and that they're willing to inscribe. So we want to leave a little time for that. So take that question.
And anyone who needs to leave, please feel free to leave. My day job, I'm a sleep specialist, so we're not going to keep you here all night. That's a great question. And you know, it's one that I've been thinking about, because currently, at least in the British newspapers, there's been a rising call for academic boycott against Israel. I find this mind-boggling, because there is a basis for gender apartheid, at least that I have lived in Saudi Arabia, that continues. It is true that the King Abdullah currently has been one of the most advanced monarchs, and I think has a sincere concern for women in his country and has opened avenues for women in the country. In the 15 years I've been visiting, I see Saudi women advancing much further than they were previously. They are urologists, they are metallurgists, they have political office. One of my female colleagues has changed the reporting of domestic violence and child abuse in Saudi Arabia personally, so I know there are things that women do there. But women are legally designated unequal in every sphere of their life in Saudi Arabia. So if we want to start with apartheid, there's gender apartheid. In Pakistan, I don't know what other way to describe it, but faith apartheid. And that's very plain to see. There's no concealing in it. And it is something, I love your idea of shaming individuals into action. It is something that I think it's a public fact, but I think it's completely eluded public dialogue. A couple of months ago, I was at the Asia Society. I went to listen to Foreign Minister Hina Rabbani. And Hina Rabbani is Pakistan's foreign minister. She's about 35 years old, very engaging, very striking woman, very well spoken. And she was interviewed and asked about what Pakistan's outlook is in terms of the why should the United States continue to give aid to the Pakistan, and what has Pakistan done on the war on terror. And she then went on and talked about 49,000 lives that have been lost by Pakistanis, and that was adequate price enough, and there's no price tag in billions for the equivalent that Pakistani citizens have given up in the war on terror. What she failed to say, and what whoever the journalist failed to say, was that killing is based in sectarianism. What you said about Iraq, that there was a chance that the United States perhaps could assist Christian freedoms. The killing that's happened in Iraq is the hands of Muslims on Muslims. It is sectarianism. Why is there sectarianism in Pakistan? Because it's legislated. It's legislated almost from the inception. Pakistan had a fledgling constitution in 56. There was a military coup by 59 that had been dismantled. And anything that remains of a constitution is what I call hybridized Sharia. It's really a Kafkaesque, a horrific construction of laws by non-elected committees. So I don't know necessarily why they speak to Israel as the apartheid state when my own Israeli Palestinian guide or Israeli Arab guide was explaining to me he was born in Jerusalem and he was given the chance to have Israeli citizenship. His parents were born in Jerusalem. They have Israeli residency. His brother is an Israeli citizen, and his brother is a bus driver who was badly injured in a terrorist attack, badly wounded, and for 9 years rehabilitated with Israeli health insurance. So this country, to me, does not fit with the experiences of apartheid where I've lived or I have traveled frequently, and I've been traveling to Pakistan for 40 years, previous occasion. So I asked him, when you are in front of the Human Rights Committee and you're questioning them, what is it about, why has nobody excoriated Pakistan in these kinds of forum? And I didn't ask him permission to quote, but I'll tell you what he told me. He didn't say it was confidential. He described the Pakistani diplomats as highly articulate, highly well-educated. He commented on their British accents, even though he is himself Canadian and well-spoken. And masters at handling the operations of the Human Rights Council. So I'm thinking about the elite Pakistanis that I met at the Lahore Polo Club in those similar salons. They have Eton educations, they have Cambridge degrees, they are more privileged than I am, and I'm very privileged myself. And they're not challenged. They're not challenged by people like the leadership in the United States, who is afraid to use the word Islamist, who's outlawed the word jihadist from our federal agencies, even though when I go to Pakistan and I go with the Pakistani military, they are fighting jihadists and they are suffering huge losses at the hands of jihadists, where I stayed at the Malakan fort for 3 days. So there's no political correctness in the Muslims who are actually confronting jihadist ideology themselves, the way we have reticence in the West. And there's no one saying, if we should, Stephen Hawking does not say boycott Saudi Arabia, does not say boycott Pakistan. Forget Saudi Arabia, it's named after a family and it's not a democracy. But Pakistan is a huge force in the OIC. Nobody is challenging it. And there are significant penalties that country could be placed under, which would cause hardship to my own family and many, many individuals. But I don't know what else the country needs to do to begin to earn sanctions and penalties because of the history it has in terms of individual freedoms. And you mentioned women as a minority. I mean, it went right out of my brain because the atrocities on minorities are just so terrible. Who can think of their gender? This is affecting both genders.
Okay, I'm going to try to take two more quick questions. Jeff.
Dr. Ahmed, first of all, I was very disappointed that your presentation had to come to an end. It was absolutely riveting, and thank you so much for sharing. But I was wondering whether you would care to comment about a trend. You touched upon the Muslim on Muslim persecution, but I've noticed a trend in the Muslim world towards atomization. Radical Islam, I don't think can anymore be defined because you have, even in a micro society like Gaza, Jund al-Islam, Jesh al-Sharia, and Ansar al-Sharia, Lashkar al-Taiba. I can keep going on and on and on. I was wondering whether you believed as a possible solution that if there was some central authority, I'm not talking about Sheikh Kardawi or somebody like that, or the Sheikh of Al-Azhar University, but something akin to the Pope in the Vatican, whether that might resolve or at least make addressable some of the issues in the radical Islamic world?
No, I think that's a great question. You mentioned the Sheikh Al-Azhar. I recently was reading that the Sheikh of Al-Azhar in Cairo in 1989 had eschewed the role of violent jihad as a contemporary tool. So that's almost 20 or 30 years ago. I don't feel very hopeful. Even if there was a global figure like the Pope, the Ahmadi community has a Khalifa who's very well regarded. Other communities have religious leaders, but nobody of the stature of the Pope or perhaps the preeminent rabbis. I see much of the Muslim world in a state of anarchy. And I think Pakistan exemplifies it well because it does have all of these multiple jihadist groups. And we see them splintering in the Sinai, and I hear about them splintering in Gaza. What I think has happened is man in these states, or human beings, have appointed themselves in the role of the divine. That's really what's happened in Pakistan, is there's a state or a human being saying that you are Muslim, you are not. This is Islam, this is not. The entire society has crumbled into a series of individuals. There are very good secular politicians. You saw Salman Taseer as a product of Pakistan, Shahbaz Bhatti is a product of Pakistan, Asma Jahangir, a human rights lawyer, is a product of Pakistan. So obviously there are rays of hope. But I think this disarray is a central problem, and I don't see it getting better. I think it's actually going to get worse in the vacuum created by the Arab Spring. It's going to get worse in the AfPak vacuum, even though the United States may have done no favors for fueling sectarianism. And I've heard your argument about a sense of inferiority in the Muslim world. I heard that from Thomas Friedman myself, and I think that's a reality. However, that inferiority speaks very much to those individuals who drank the Kool-Aid and believed in political Islamism. Most of us are able to see centuries of history in Islam and understand that, like all civilizations, there were great apices, and now we're in the modern day. If we look at contemporary Muslim world, it's true. We lag behind the Western world in almost every aspect. I've lived in the most privileged community in the Muslim world, Saudi Arabia, with some of the highest per capita population, highest per capita income, and I don't see it advancing. That's partly one of the many reasons there's so much antagonism to Israel is your intellectual prowess and your extraordinary prowess per capita population, which rivals even the United States, which I think intellectually may be on some decline. So if there was one figure, would it make it easier? I suppose possibly, but I think the Muslim world itself is so fragmented. Even when we use this word, the Muslim world, this is not useful. I showed you that weighted map, but there's now a completely different Muslim world in Britain compared to where I grew up. Much more moving towards orthodoxy. The same in France. The United States Muslim community is changing to a large degree, so I don't know how much a central figure could have helped.
Okay, we'll take last question over here. Yeah, a quick
Why do you keep going back, and aren't you afraid being so outspoken and published?
Oh yeah, why don't I do that?
Being so outspoken and published, don't you fear for when you go back and for your personal?
Okay, so thank you for that question. First of all, I was raised by parents who privileged enormously from Christian teachers and from British colonial India and the British Empire. So we were raised always, they migrated to Britain, yes, for their education, but also with a view to contribute to the society to which they came from. And I've been a beneficiary of their privilege and also incredible privilege from the United States. I think I have a responsibility, and I happen to have several, can you hear me okay? I have had several strange life experiences where I was able to live in certain places, and I have some ability to write. So I think for someone like me, who's a product of two democracies and privileged economically and intellectually, it's not a question of being brave, it's a part of having a sense of duty. I haven't happened to create a family, I haven't created a business, but perhaps I can help spread some ideas. Why I keep going back? I don't keep going back. I've just recently been reinvited to go to Saudi Arabia, and let's see, that's in a few months. My Saudi colleagues are in a very difficult position because of some of my writings. Many of them have abandoned their friendships with me. Some of them have publicly berated me. Yeah. And however, several of them know that I'm here now, and even in an email cannot use the word Israel, not for any reason other than their distaste. But I will go back to Saudi Arabia to present the paper about the Taliban and polio. And I feel that as long as I am invited, I will go back. Pakistan is highly dangerous, and at the last visit, I went back because I have family there, but also because I particularly wanted to see these children for myself. When you've seen something with your own eyes and heard it in your parents' language, I think it really makes things clear. And I have the privilege of being a physician, which means that you can often go to places and go as a physician observer, and I took the chance. But to let you know how dangerous it was a visit in which I was not asked to go as a writer. I was asked by a physician colleague to go as a physician, though she understood I would publish about our experiences. I've published about her work, but she's asked in many articles to have her name out of it, because you can see what happens to people in the public eye in Pakistan. They get executed. when we traveled to the northwest frontier, we went from Lahore, and it's about a 600 or 700 mile visit, and we went in a vehicle with altered license plates, and about 200 miles out of the area, we were escorted by 6 Pakistan Rangers at all times for 3 days and stayed in military barracks. If I was seeing somebody, there was a soldier about 4 feet away with weapons, ensuring my safety, and the children were not at risk at that stage. So I feel if I have the ability, this is what I should do. And that's partly why I'm here, is I've spent so many years writing about Israel, I should go. I'm already being criticized for not going to the Palestinian-controlled areas, but I haven't been invited to any of the Palestinian-controlled areas, and I don't know how else I would justify my visit to go. So if there was ever a university that invited me, I wouldn't have a reason to go. I certainly have no intention of going to Hamas-controlled areas because of some of the things that you've quoted. I think that would be folly, and you know, my parents have asked me not to go to those places. But if people like me, who have all this opportunity, don't say anything, then that silence we talked about at the beginning continues. And I think that's got to be the only solution, and communities and societies which give voice to that are about the only hope. That's why I feel so angry about the public silencing in the United States about these conversations, or a government that will sanitize a discussion about Islamist terrorism or radical contemporary Islamist terrorism, or whatever you want to call it. It's now used colloquially as Al-Qaeda, but you're right, it's fragmented in so many views. We've got to call it what it is. It's a politicized, religionized terrorism which is being conducted in the name of religion, and many buy this as the real version of religion. So if I'm not here to say that, then I'm not sure what Christians and Jewish people can be able to say alone. That's why I do it.